Yo, what's going on, everyone? It's Benjamin Nowak with the Smallmouth Experience, video number 10 in my 14 Days of Quarantine series. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about jig fishing for smallmouth bass. The jigs that I use, the trailers that I throw, and the rod, reel, line setup that I use to be successful when jig fishing. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions that a lot of people have is that smallmouth have small mouths, so they're not going to go and eat a bulky jig. Well, that's just not true. Smallmouth, like largemouth, especially on river systems or inland lakes, will eat crawfish and bluegill, and they'll eat basically the same forage types that your largemouth will eat. However, I do downsize my jigs a little bit, use smaller hooks, so we're going to run through all of that in today's video. Now I want to start with one of my most commonly used types of jigs, and it's basically just a 1/2 ounce flipping jig. Now this is actually a Boss flipping jig, and I like this purple with green hollow flash. I tied this jig skirt, but this is a great color for inland bodies of water. A lot of our bodies of water are tannic, which means they have like a tea color to them, and so that June bug with that green flash looks like a lot of the bait fish we have, the bluegill, the perch, and it also stands out really well, contrasts in that tannic water, just like down in Florida. But this is nothing special. This is actually just a Boss Sparky head jig, so it's got a big 4 or 5/0 Gamakatsu or Mustad hook, and it's basically your standard skipping or flipping jig. What I like about this is that it does have a big hook, so I can drive that hook home, and once you put a trailer on here and you trim the jig up a little bit, you actually don't have that large of a profile. This is something that a lot of people have to get over when they're jig fishing, is that it's really not that big of a profile. It's no bigger than a tube. It's no bigger than some of the other smallmouth baits that we throw, like those medium and deep diving crankbaits. So get over the fact that it looks like it's a big profile. Smallmouth will eat it, and you catch big ones as well as numbers throwing a jig. Now typically when I'm flipping a jig, I'm using some sort of craw trailer. It's either a Strike King Rage craw or a Berkeley Chigger craw. Now these are two of my favorites. I like that craw profile. It has that kind of caking action coming through the water, which will slow that jig down and give those fish a chance to key in on it. And it also allows you to swim that bait really easily and effectively to get those fish to chase it. A lot of these smallmouth are super aggressive, so something with flailing arms tends to get their attention really well, and that draws those fish to that bait, and they'll come up and crush it. A lot of times it's going to be used to imitate bluegill, crawfish, perch, whatever your type of forage is. That's really what I'm going for as far as color selection, but also keep water clarity in mind. The dirtier the water, the darker jig you want to be fishing. Predominantly, I'm either going with that June bug color or some sort of crawfish color like this jig here. Now this jig is kind of a crossover style jig, and it has a very, very small hook on this. So it's sort of a flipping jig, sort of a finesse jig, and it's really an all-around good jig when you're smallmouth fishing because it has a very small presentation. So when you need to downsize a little bit, I recommend finding a little bit smaller jig. Now this is a Gamakatsu Cobra head jig. It's a little 3/0 hook on there, so it's a really small presentation. But you have all that living rubber, so when this bait gets in the water, it flares out really big and draws a lot of big bites. The thing that I really like about this jig, again, I'm going to mention it over and over, is that small, compact profile. Smallmouth bass are notorious for kind of getting the hook funny, so by using a lighter weed guard and a smaller hook, they're going to get that bait in their mouth better. It's going to result in getting more smallmouth to the boat. Again, color selection when I'm using a finesse jig is super simple. It's either green pumpkin or some sort of craw color, and this is actually one where I won't mix in like a black and blue, because typically when I'm smallmouth fishing, I'm fishing around cleaner bodies of water. I'm fishing the Great Lakes, or I'm fishing like river systems where it's 100% smallmouth. That water's a little bit cleaner. They're keying in on crawfish, something along the bottom, gobies, and so those browns and greens work really effectively. Now with this, I'm using smaller jig trailers. I'm using your Rage Menace grub, and I'll cut it down a little bit. I'll use a Zoom Ultra Vibe Speed Craw, something with a little bit smaller profile. Again, I want to make this jig compact, more finesse, and I want these fish to be able to get it in their mouth with no hesitation. So going to a little bit smaller profile trailer is going to help you land more fish when you're using a more compact finesse style jig. The next style of jig that I use, and this is predominantly something that I throw in the spring, is a swim jig. And I'll swim a jig when I'm looking for smallmouth, when I want to get smallmouth to kind of come from long distances. And the reason for that is just like a little swim bait, this thing can swim through the water, looks super natural, and draws fish from a long ways away. A lot of the times I'm going to be throwing like a craw color like this, basically a green pumpkin base with a little bit of orange, or I will mix in that June bug, again, if I'm fishing more tannic style inland bodies of water. But my favorite color when I'm swimming a jig for smallmouth bass is something craw color. This is actually a Do It Molds weedless swim jig mold. I tied this myself. It's a Gamakatsu 345 hook, I believe you can get it at Lure Parts online, and then a lighter wire weed guard. When you're swimming a jig, you don't want something really heavy, a heavy weed guard, especially for smallmouth bass. You want that fish to be able to get it, compress that weed guard, and get that hook really easily. So that little bit smaller profile with that lighter wire weed guard is going to help you pin more fish and get them into the boat. You're going to notice this throughout basically all of my jigs. I'm using a little bit lighter weed guards than a lot of people. Granted, we're fishing up here in the north. We're not fishing around super heavy mats, and we're not, flipping it through hyacinth and anything crazy like that. So you don't need a really heavy weed guard. So having that lighter wire weed guard or lighter weed guard in your jig is going to help you pin more fish and get them into the boat. When I'm fishing a swim jig, I'm either fishing a Rage Craw or I'm fishing a Zoom Ultra Vibe Speed Craw. Another really good one is a Gambler Burner Craw, but I don't think it has quite as much action as the Zoom Speed Craw. So those are my main trailers. Again, keep it natural. Keep it craw color, keep it browns, green pumpkins, and if you're going with that June bug color for tannic bodies of water, a black and blue jig trailer is a great choice. Now we're going to talk about one of my favorite jigs to throw for smallmouth bass, and that is a football jig. And the reason I like to throw a football jig so much is that it works really well around rock. If I'm fishing a rocky shoal, if I'm fishing an area where I know there's a bunch of rock down there and I don't want to throw a wobble head, I can take a football jig and drag it through there. It's a big presence, big profile, going to draw a little bit bigger bites than if you're throwing like a Ned rig down there, and it comes through that rock really well because of that football head. It's a really wide head, and so instead of lodging in the rocks, it's going to help this jig come through there really easily and not get hung up and catch a lot of big fish. Again, super light wire weed guard. You're not typically fishing around really heavy grass, so you don't need a heavy weed guard. And when you're fishing around rock, you just want that fish to get the bait and not really have any resistance. When I'm fishing a big football jig, I will go with your Zoom Speed Craw or your Rage Craw. And the reason for that is I want a craw style profile because you're imitating gobies, you're imitating crawfish, you're imitating things that live on the bottom. So in the football jig, I'm either throwing green pumpkin or I'm throwing a green pumpkin orange or a green pumpkin purple, right? Really, really simple, basic colors. Something green pumpkin base. These fish are keying in on crawfish and gobies. So when you're throwing a football head jig around rock, keep it simple, green pumpkin orange, green pumpkin purple. Match your trailer to the jig. Now let's talk about my overall rod, reel, and line setup. And this is where I keep it super simple. If you're looking for a great all-around jig rod, I like a 7'3", either a medium heavy or a heavy power rod. So this is a 736. It is a 7'3" heavy rod, and I like that heavy because I can really set the hook on them, fish it on 20-pound test line, and not worry about breaking off. This will work for all different types of jigs, whether you're swimming it, whether you're flipping a jig. That 20-pound test line with either a medium heavy or a heavy rod is going to be perfect for you. Now, the reel that you want to go to when you're fishing a jig is a high speed gear ratio reel. A lot of times what will happen is those fish, just like with a tube, they'll come up and they'll kind of nip at it or push it, and you won't necessarily feel that, but when they eat it, they'll sort of push that bait towards you, so you need to be able to pick up slack really quickly. So by fishing a higher speed gear ratio reel, you're going to be able to pick up slack, you're going to be able to get that fish moving towards you and set the hook, kind of turn them and get them coming to the boat. With that 20-pound test line, I don't really play them. My drag is locked down. I just kind of, fight them to the boat, get them in, flip them in if I want, but it's just a really fun way to get a lot of big bites as well as get a bunch of bites when you're out there smallmouth fishing. So if you guys have any questions about any of the jigs that I use, any of the trailers that I'm throwing, please let me know in the comment section below. I'll answer all of those questions for you guys as best as I possibly can. Thank you guys for watching. Again, this is video number 10 in my 14 Days of Quarantine series. In tomorrow's video, you're actually going to see the video that I'm filming out here today. I'm out here fishing today, actually for largemouth bass, but there's some awesome fish catches, so stay tuned for tomorrow's video as well. If you're not already, hit the subscribe button down below. Hit that notification bell because it'll let you know when I post more videos just like this one here. If there's something you guys want to see, let me know in the comment section below. And as always, thank you guys for watching. Take care, tight lines, God bless, pursue your passion.